begin with breaking news where the search for 64 passengers and 3 Army soldiers has turned into a recovery mission after an aviation disaster in the skies of Washington, D.C. American Airlines Flight 5342 was on approach to the runway when it collided with a Black Hawk military chopper. This is a live look right now at that crash site. Rescue crews searching the wreckage in the Potomac River, which is a chilling -1 degree at the moment. This morning, we've heard from President Donald Trump calling a dark day in the nation's history. 9 US correspondent Jonathan Kersley begins our coverage.
Tragedy in the skies above Washington, D.C.
Oh, what happened?
Oh, my God!
Air traffic controllers saw it unfold.
Pass 25, get the CRJ in flight. Pass 25, pass 100 CRJ.
New vision has emerged showing the collision in the background of the US Capitol building. 64 people were on board the American Airlines passenger plane, 3 on the US military Black Hawk. It was on a training exercise. This is now a recovery operation. President Trump is leading the morning.
This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history.
Among the victims, figure skaters from a club in Boston.
I've never seen anyone love skating as much as these two, and that's why I think it hurts so much.
The American Airlines first officer on board confirmed as 28-year-old Sam Lilly. The young man was engaged to be married and close to a promotion. 34-year-old Jonathan Campos was the captain. As the focus now turns to the investigation, America's new defense secretary says the military crew on the helicopter was equipped with night vision. The president has his own assessment.
You could have stopped the helicopter. You could have gone up. You could have gone down. You could have gone straight up, straight down. You could have turned. You could have done a million different maneuvers. For some reason, it just kept going.
A lot of questions. 9 US correspondent Jonathan Kersley joins us now from Ronald Reagan National Airport in Virginia. Jono, good morning to you again. We're learning more about the lead up to the crash.
Yeah, we are. This investigation just hours old, but already some detail is starting to filter through. The New York Times is reporting that the pilots on board the American Airlines plane that was coming in to land here at Reagan National Airport behind me had been asked shortly before the collision to change the runway they were going to land on. That is, essentially, their landing route was being altered. We are also hearing through preliminary investigations concerns about staffing levels at the air traffic control tower here at Reagan National, that the levels were not normal for that time of day and for the level of air traffic that was in the vicinity at the time. There's questions too around why military training helicopters are still flying these routes, given that there is so much commercial aircraft activity going on in this area at a very busy airport. The National Transportation Safety Board right now is updating the press. They say they won't be giving specifics. It is their first full day on the ground, combing through crew.
This is an all-hands on-deck event, and we're here to assure the American people that we are going to leave no stone unturned.
As for the crew on board the military helicopter, it is being reported that the pilot was 29-year-old Ryan O'Hara. He survived by a wife and 1-year-old child.
It's terribly sad. Jono, thank you. More now on that horror aircraft crash in Washington, D.C. US officials confirming there are no survivors after an American Airlines passenger jet carrying 64 people collided in mid-air with a Black Hawk military helicopter. For more, we're joined by witness Matthew Capucci, live in the US Capitol. Matthew, thank you for being with us on what must have been horrendous for everyone involved there. Talk us through what you saw unfold.
Most definitely. So the incident took place at 8:56 p.m. last night local time, and I have to say, you know, living near the airport, you're used to hearing airplane sounds pretty much all hours of the day, and suddenly around 9 o'clock, right after the incident, that stopped. The only sounds were really sirens in the distance, and then this eerie silence, and looking out the window, you know, I could see dozens, if not hundreds of emergency vehicles responding on both sides of the River Potomac, which again is right behind us. The runway parallels the Potomac River. And It looked like a very coordinated interagency response, but to see that many lights all at once was pretty unsettling. Ultimately, the silence is really what I think was the biggest takeaway, and seeing boats in the river trying to rescue anyone who was potentially still alive at that point was something I didn't expect to see here in the nation's capital, in what should be the most tightly governed airspace in the world.
Yeah, having been there many times, you do see a lot of military aircraft, and they seem to be able to coordinate that with a very busy airport where you are. You were near the crash zone when emergency services started arriving. You've seen what's unfolded over the last 12 or so hours. It's truly shocking as America tries to come to grips with what happened. It's also been politicised a little as well. I'm not sure any of that helps.
No, it most definitely doesn't. The press releases we saw earlier on in the press conferences sort of distracted from the key issues at hand. And I know there's a rush for the public who wants a response. The government wants a response as well. We saw that in the president's press conference earlier on today. But things like this, by virtue of how many moving pieces there are, have to be procedural. Oftentimes, NTSB, National Safety Transit Bureau, takes a long time to get results out, but they have to do so. It takes a long time to comb through all this data. And ultimately, when something this severe happens, we want to make sure we get to the bottom of things the way that we need to. Yeah,
look, air traffic control, the audio recordings that have been released, and it looks like that Black Hawk helicopter was warned about the passenger jet, but may or may not have heard it, so it's just tragic. Just looking at that live shot there too, extremely cold conditions in the region, right? And the current in the river is really strong, so that will be hampering events.
Yeah, most definitely. That was certainly a contributing factor, just in the fact that water temperatures are only between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius right now. So if there were any survivors who survived the initial impact, it's likely they would have suffered hypothermia within the first 5 to 10 minutes and loss of consciousness shortly thereafter. That's not only an issue for, of course, the people who are impacted, but also the rescue personnel who are working to try to extricate people from the water if they were still surviving. It's so many unfortunate complicating factors with this. One other thing worth mentioning, too, the winds weren't terribly strong. Visibility was good, but it's possible that wind may have been a contributing factor, gusting around 40 kilometers per hour, something the NTSB will definitely be looking into.
All right, Matthew, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. The US Capitol is the scene of a major aviation disaster this morning. 67 confirmed dead after a mid-air collision between an American Airlines jet and a US Army Black Hawk helicopter. Here is air traffic controllers watching the tragedy unfold.
The accident happened in the river. Both the helicopter and the plane crashed in the river. It's east of the approach end of runway 33. It was probably out in the middle of the river. I just saw a fireball and then it was just gone.
For more, we are joined now by former air traffic controller Michelle Robson, live from Surrey in the UK. Michelle, thanks so much for your time. So take us in there. Talk us through what would have been happening in that control room at that moment.
So it appears that the helicopter was operating visually, which would be normal for a helicopter, particularly a military one. Helicopters are very manoeuvrable compared with a normal airline, which obviously normally if you're flying a plane on approach would be probably 140 miles an hour or something like that, whereas a helicopter can obviously stop and hover. It's very manoeuvrable. So the onus was on the helicopter pilot to avoid the American Airlines CRJ. Now, the transcripts do show that the controller said to the helicopter pilot, "Do you have the CRJ in sight?" and then follows that up and says, "Pass behind the CRJ." So it was quite a clear instruction, though he never said to the aircraft, well, the helicopter, that it was an American Airlines, which might have ensured that he correctly identified the aircraft. But there is no reply from the helicopter pilot to that instruction. This isn't unusual in the US. In very busy environments, readbacks, as we call them in the UK, aren't as regular as you might have in the UK or other less busy environments. So we don't actually know if the helicopter pilot ever correctly identified the American Airlines CRJ.
Yeah, that's really interesting, as tragic as it is as well. Having landed there many, many times, it's such a busy place. Yeah. Is it unusual to have that level of military aircraft flying that closely to those regular routes?
It's not, because obviously being the capital of the US, you've got a lot of military activity around there with all the local military bases. So it's quite a normal activity for helicopters to be crossing, and there should be published routes that they would normally follow. But as I said, they'd be flying visually. It was good weather conditions, even though it was night, it was clear. So it should have been a fairly simple thing that the controller had done many times, though we do know obviously that it was a training flight, the helicopter, but there would have been experienced pilots on board, even if the pilot under training was less experienced.
It's not as if sorry, Sis, it's not as if the plane took an alternate route for some unexplained reason at this point. The routes are pretty well known going in and out of that airport.
It was on a slightly different runway. A lot of the traffic was landing on a different runway to the American, which may have potentially caused some confusion with the helicopter pilot. But it was on a standard arrival route. It was all being controlled by the air traffic controller and would have been on the instrument landing system, which is a very set way of approaching the airport and descending on the glide slope into the airport.